So our goal in this particular section is to set up a basic CRUD application where we're going to create API endpoints to create, edit, delete, and read from our entities. And the entity that we're going to start with, because our application is all about activities, then it makes sense to start with creating our activity entity. And we want to be able to, as I say, create, read, update, and delete these different activities in our database. So let's set this up. And what we'll do first of all, inside our domain project, we'll create a new C# class, and this one we'll simply call activity. Now, if this situation happens and you try and create a class in this way using the C# extensions that we have here, the extension we're using that is responsible for this little piece of functionality is called C# extensions. And I find the easiest way to fix this particular problem is just to disable and then re-enable this particular extension. And then if we go back to Solution Explorer, and once again I'll try and create a new C# class called activity, this time it should create it successfully. Now I don't have a fix for an extension that I haven't created, and this is the workaround that I've used to get around this particular problem. So VS Code and the extensions are not perfect, but it's not that big a deal to do what I just did. So anyway, let's go ahead and create the activity. Now we're going to need properties for this particular class, and for the ID that we're going to use for the activity, we're actually going to use a GUID as opposed to an integer. And using a GUID allows us to create the ID from either the server side or the client side code. Now there's a reason for this, and when we come on to the pattern that we're using, I'll explain in more detail about why we're using a GUID for the ID for this particular entity. But in order to use a GUID, we're going to need to bring in system, and then we'll create the other properties we need. Another property we need is a string for the title, and we'll also add another string for the description, and we'll add another string for the category, and then we'll add a date time for the date of the activity, and then we need two more strings, one for the city where the activity is taking place, and one for the venue. And this is our activity class. And what we need to do is we want Entity Framework to create a table in our SQLite database for our new entity. So what we'll do is we'll go across to our data context, which is inside our persistence project. And what we'll do is we'll add another DB set. So we'll say DB set of type activity, and we want to call this particular table activities. And then what we can do is go ahead and create our new migration. So let's open up the terminal window, and if you have your API server running, you'll need to stop this. And then what we can do is say .NET EF migrations add, and then I'll just say activity entity added, and then we'll specify the project that contains our data context. So this is persistence, and then we'll add the S switch for our startup project, which is the API, and I'll press return, and this goes ahead and creates the new migration. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's been created, and I'll just go into Solution Explorer, and if I just expand the migrations folder, we can see that we have a new migration now that's going to create a table in our database called activities, along with the columns for each of our properties. And because we called the ID, then this is going to be what's used as our primary key for this particular table. Now, because we've set up our application to automatically apply migrations when we start our application, let's go ahead and restart our application. So I'm just going to cd into the API folder, and I'm going to say .NET watch run and press return, and this should go ahead and create our new activities table, and we can see the command is taking place in here. Now, one thing I'll point out, because it does look a bit strange, but it's not anything to be concerned about, is that SQLite doesn't have any support for a GUID, and it actually stores them as a blob. But don't worry about this, because Entity Framework is going to take care of the translation between a GUID and a blob, and is going to output this when we request this particular entity and we go and get our list of activities or a single activity. Then it's going to pass that down to our client as a GUID string. It's not going to be an object that gets sent down to our client. So if we go and take a look at our SQLite database, and I'll just need to open the database, and I'm just going to go into the command shell and say SQLite open database, choose reactivitiesDB, and then in SQLite Explorer I should see that I have my activities table inside my SQLite database. So now that we have our activities table, let's go ahead next and seed some data into it. And we'll look at a slightly different approach to do this than we did last time.